The asphalt of Juniper Lane was always shimmering with a thin layer of expensive sealant, a testament to the iron-fisted rule of Mrs. Gable, the self-appointed president of the Homeowners Association. To the neighborhood, she was simply the HOA Karen. To me, she was the woman who had issued me 16 citations in 3 months, one of which was for having a non-harmonious shade of beige on my curtains. I had lived in this neighborhood for 10 years, long before Mrs. Gable moved in and decided that every blade of grass needed to be exactly 2.5 inches tall. I liked my quiet life. I liked my restored 1968 Mustang, and I liked my designated parking spot right in front of my unit. It was the only spot on the street with a direct view of the sunset, a small luxury I cherished after a long shift at the hospital. Then came Tyler. Tyler was Mrs. Gable's 22-year-old son, a man who possessed all of his mother's entitlement but none of her organizational skills. He drove a neon green modified hatchback that sounded like a lawnmower losing a fight with a blender. He didn't just park, he conquered. The warning shots. It started on a Tuesday. I pulled into the cul-de-sac to find the neon green eyesore angled sharply across my spot, not just touching the line but dead center, blocking the entrance to my small driveway. I knocked on the Gable's door. Mrs. Gable opened it, her glasses perched on the tip of her nose like a predator's talons. "Mr. Henderson," she sighed, as if my presence were a stain on her porch. "Is there a problem? Your trash cans were out 3 minutes past the 6:00 p.m. deadline yesterday. I was just writing the notice." "Forget the trash, Mrs. Gable," I said, keeping my voice level. "Tyler is in my spot. I need to get my car into the garage." She looked past me at the green car. "Oh, Tyler is just visiting for a few months. He needs to be close to the house so I can keep an eye on his condition." "His condition?" "He has sensitive nerves," she said flatly. "Walking from the overflow lot would be a hardship. Surely a man of your stature can find somewhere else to park for an evening." I ended up parking 3 blocks away. That night, it rained. I walked home in the downpour, my scrubs soaking through while Tyler's car sat dry and smug in my spot. The escalation. Over the next 2 weeks, the temporary situation became a siege. Every time I left for work, Tyler was there. If I managed to snag the spot while he was out, I'd return to find a formal HOA violation taped to my windshield claiming I was obstructing the flow of emergency vehicles by parking in my own deeded space. The dialogue between us grew colder. One afternoon, I caught Tyler lounging on his hood, tossing cigarette butts into my flower bed. "Hey, Tyler," I called out, "that's my spot. You know the rules, even your mom's rules." He didn't even look up from his phone. "Mom says you're a legacy resident. That means you're grandfathered into the old rules, but the new rules say this spot is common ground. Since I got here first, it's mine." "That's not how property deeds work," I replied. "Tell it to the board," he smirked. "Oh wait, my mom is the board." I felt a heat rising in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. I was a patient man, nurses have to be, but the blatant disregard for basic human decency was starting to wear me down. I tried the proper channels. I sent emails. I attended a board meeting where Mrs. Gable silenced me by citing a rule that prohibited aggressive vocalizations. The breaking point didn't happen in a moment of rage. It happened in a moment of absolute, cold clarity. The catalyst. On Friday, I came home from a double shift. I was exhausted, grieving a patient we had lost, and all I wanted was to sit in my chair and stare at the wall. When I turned onto Juniper Lane, I saw it. Tyler hadn't just parked in my spot. He had backed his car so far up that his rear bumper was actually touching my garage door. I couldn't even get inside my own house through the front. I got out of my car, leaving it idling in the middle of the street. I walked up to the Gables' house and pounded on the door. No one answered. I checked the driveway. Mrs. Gable's pristine SUV was gone. They were out to dinner. I looked at the green hatchback. It was a cheap car, but Tyler had poured money into it: gaudy spoilers, a ridiculous sound system, and a paint job that hurt the eyes. He loved this car. It was his pride, his joy, and his weapon of choice for bullying the neighborhood. I looked at my garage. On the workbench inside, just reachable through the side window, was a gallon of industrial-strength paint stripper I'd bought for a furniture project. Next to it was a bag of quickset concrete mix from a patio repair. A dark, intrusive thought entered my mind. It wasn't about violence, it was about erasing the nuisance. The transformation. I worked with a surgical precision that only a man who has spent 20 years in an operating room can manage. I didn't use a hammer, I didn't break a window, that would be vandalism in the traditional sense. This was something else. This was an artistic statement. First, I took the paint stripper. I didn't splash it. I applied it with a foam brush in a very specific pattern. I wrote the text of the HOA bylaws regarding unauthorized parking across the hood, the roof, and the doors. Within minutes, the neon green paint began to bubble and liquefy, sliding off the metal like melting wax. Next, I turned my attention to the interior. The sunroof was cracked open. Tyler's arrogance was his undoing. I mixed the quickset concrete in a bucket with a bit of water. I didn't fill the car, that would be too much. I simply poured it into the footwells and over the gear shift. In 30 minutes, that car would be a permanent fixture of the chassis. It would never shift into gear again. But I wasn't done. The title of the story I wanted to tell required a totaling of the ego. I went into my garden and grabbed a bag of birdseed, the high-quality stuff with the extra sunflower seeds. I coated the roof of the car, which was now a sticky, gooey mess of dissolved paint. Then I took a bottle of fermented fish sauce from my pantry, a gift from a neighbor that I'd never used, and poured it into the air intake vents at the base of the windshield. The smell was instantaneous. It was the scent of 1,000 rotting pears. Finally, I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea and waited. The climax. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a beautiful orange glow over the cul-de-sac when Mrs. Gable's SUV turned the corner. Tyler was in the passenger seat, laughing at something on his phone. As they pulled closer, the laughter died. In the twilight, the green hatchback looked like a monster from a swamp. The paint had sloughed off in giant, gray sheets, leaving the car looking like a leper. Hundreds of local starlings, alerted by the birdseed, had descended upon it, fluttering and pecking at the remains of the roof. Tyler jumped out of the SUV before it had even stopped. "My car, what the mom, my car." He ran to the hatchback and tried to open the door. The paint stripper had seeped into the door seals and bonded with the rubber. It groaned but held fast. He reached through the open sunroof, his hand landing squarely in the wet, hardening concrete of the center console. "It's stuck," he screamed. "Mom, my hand is stuck in the floor." Mrs. Gable marched toward my porch, her face a shade of purple I didn't know the human body could produce. "Henderson, you've destroyed it. This is a felony. I'm calling the police. I'm calling the National Guard." I took a slow sip of my tea. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Gable. I've been sitting here enjoying the sunset. It looks like Tyler parked over some very caustic chemical runoff. And honestly, the birds, that's just nature. Perhaps if the car wasn't obstructing the natural harmony of my driveway, the birds wouldn't have noticed it." The police did arrive, eventually. A young officer named Miller, who had been called to the neighborhood dozens of times by Mrs. Gable for crimes like walking a dog with a leash that was too long, looked at the car. He looked at the dissolving paint. He looked at Tyler, who was now crying because the smell of the fish sauce had finally hit his nostrils. He looked at the concrete-filled cup holders. "Sir," Miller said to me, trying very hard to suppress a smile, "did you see who did this?" "Officer, I saw a group of very disgruntled-looking squirrels earlier," I said. "But in all seriousness, I was inside. I did notice the car was leaking some sort of green fluid, probably the cheap paint Tyler used. It must have had a chemical reaction with the asphalt sealant your department applied last week, Mrs. Gable." Mrs. Gable gasped, my sealant is industrial grade." "Exactly," I said. "And when you mix industrial sealant with low-grade automotive paint in a confined space, well, you get a meltdown. It's basic chemistry, CH4+, well, you get the idea." I was making it up, but she didn't know that. The officer took a deep breath of the fish sauce. "The smell, though, that's not chemistry." "Local wildlife?" I suggested. "The trash cans were left out too long yesterday, attracted the raccoons. They probably dragged something under the hood." The resolution. The car was a total loss. Between the concrete ruining the transmission and interior, the fish sauce making the cabin biologically uninhabitable, and the paint stripper compromising the structural integrity of the panels, the insurance adjuster simply laughed when he saw it a week later. They ruled it vandalism by unknown parties, but because Tyler had parked it illegally in a restricted zone, my deeded spot, the insurance company refused to pay out the full value. Tyler had to move back to the city to live with his father because he no longer had a way to get to his sensitive nerves appointments. Mrs. Gable lost her position as HOA president a month later. It turns out that when the police report mentioned the caustic chemical reaction might have been caused by her unauthorized driveway sealant, the neighborhood board decided she was a liability. The new president is a nice man named Bill who thinks gardens should have wildflowers and that parking spots belong to the people who pay for them. Now every evening I park my Mustang in my spot. I sit on my porch, the air smelling of jasmine and freshly cut grass, not fish sauce. And every time I see a neon green car in the distance, I smile, take a sip of my tea, and remember the day I finally brought harmony back to Juniper Lane. I didn't just trash a car, I dismantled a dynasty. And honestly, it was the most satisfying thing I've ever done.